Hey there, come a little closer to the fire with me. Tonight I want to tell you a darker truth that the old Irish hills have been holding in their breath for a very long time. A truth about doorways that look like ordinary grass, about music that arrives without a musician, about a single twilight step that can turn a lifetime into a missing afternoon. And if you listen closely, you will hear it too. The quiet warning inside the beauty. If you like these long, gentle stories, and you want more nights like this, please tap like, subscribe, and settle in with me. Now, let the room dim even more. Let your shoulders loosen, as if someone has unfastened a small knot you did not realize you were carrying. Feel your jaw unclench. Feel your tongue rest softly behind your teeth. Breathe in through your nose, slow and cool, and breathe out, slower still, like you are fogging a window that only you can see. The candles are low. The fireplace murmurs. Somewhere beyond the walls, the night has its own patient rhythm, and we can borrow it. I have always found it strange, honestly, how certain places do not feel like places at all. They feel like memories that never belong to you. Like a story told so many times, the air learned the shape of it. You know that feeling when you step into an old museum hall and everything goes quiet? Not because of rules, but because the dust itself seems to request silence? That kind of hush, that kind of soft authority. Now imagine that hush outdoors, on a hillside, with your boots damp from evening grass and the scent of wet clay rising from the ground, as if the earth has been exhaling all day and only now remembers to do it. The ancient Celts, the people who listened to rivers as if they were speaking in full sentences, did not picture reality as one flat, solid thing. They pictured it as layers, overlapping skins, a woven cloth, worlds stitched together with seams so fine you could brush them and never notice, unless you moved at exactly the wrong moment. They believed there was a world beside this one, not above it like a ceiling, not below it like a cellar, but beside it, parallel, close, intimate, so close that dusk could thin the distance, and dawn could stitch it tight again. They called one of those neighboring realms Tir na Nog, the land of the young. Even saying the name feels like touching cool stone. In Tir na Nog, the stories say, death does not rule. Time does not walk in a straight line the way it does for us. With our calendars and our shrinking numbers of days, seasons do not arrive on schedule. They arrive like moods. And the land looks almost like our land, except everything is more vivid, more awake. Grass greener than anything you have seen in a field at noon. Water clearer than crystal, but not cold in a harsh way, cold in a clean way, like a mountain stream that has never been touched by rust or smoke. The air itself hums, a soft vibration against the skin, as if the world is purring. If you were standing here with me, I would take you outside this little room for just a moment. Not far, only in imagination. We would step away from the hearth, and our footsteps would sound muted, because the night swallows sound the way deep cloth swallows light. We would walk along a narrow path, and the ground would be soft underfoot, springy with moss, slick with recent rain. Our breath would show in the air in pale threads. We would pass a low stone wall, the kind farmers build, each rock set by human hands long ago, each one rough with lichen, each one holding a little pocket of dust in its cracks. And then we would see it. It would look like nothing. That is the trick. A hump of earth, a swell of grass, a place where sheep might stand, a place where children might roll downhill laughing in summer. And yet, there are nights when the hill does not feel asleep at all. There are nights when you get close enough to notice the temperature change, just a little, like stepping into the shadow of an unseen doorway. There are nights when the air smells different at the base of the hill, sharper, like rain about to fall, mixed with something sweet you cannot name. There are nights when the birds stop singing too early, and the insects hold their noise back, as if someone has lifted a finger to their lips. The old tales say that before any mortal foot pressed into Irish soil, before the first human breath made mist in the dawn, that other world was already there, woven into everything. Its rulers were not small and winged the way later fairy stories sometimes suggest. They were vast in their presence, heavy with power. The Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, divine, or something close enough that the difference does not matter when you are alone on a hill at twilight. They did not need bread the way we do. They did not need the slow, grinding comfort of a human day. They moved between worlds the way you move from one room to another in your own home, with no surprise in it. They could shift their appearance as easily as you change your expression. They could lift a hand and call weather like you call a dog, and the clouds would come obedient. Their cities, the stories whisper, rose from living crystal and metals that sang with their own inner light. Their halls held music that could soothe a wound closed, or stir a mind into visions, or make a person forget where they are standing. Forgetfulness. That is one of the darkest threads in these tales. Not the sharp terror of a monster, but the soft erasing, the gentle slipping away of what you were sure you knew. It is debated, of course, what the old storytellers meant by it. Some scholars argue the other world is a metaphor for memory, for grief, for time itself. Others take the myths more literally, as warnings about places and moments, about the thinness of reality at certain edges of the year. Either way, the feeling is the same. You step too close. You listen too long. And something inside you begins to loosen from its usual knots. But I am not here to frighten you. I am here to turn the dread into stillness. So let us hold the tale carefully, like we hold a candle when the wind is strong. Let us keep it warm and low and safe. Imagine then that you and I are walking toward that hill, not with boldness, but with quiet respect. Our steps are slow. The grass brushes our ankles and leaves beads of water on our skin that feel like cold pearls. Somewhere nearby, water moves. A small river, perhaps, breathing against its stones. A dark ribbon of sound. River breath. Steady, unhurried. The sky is the color of old pewter. Not yet night, not yet day. The thin hour. As we get closer, we notice small things that do not shout. They only suggest. A patch of flowers blooming out of season, their petals too perfect, their color too bright for the cold. A hare sitting very still, watching us, not fearful, not friendly, simply present. The faintest trace of candle smoke in the air, even though we are outdoors, even though no one is burning anything nearby. And then, as if carried from under the ground itself, a line of music, not loud, not clear, just enough to make your heart pause for one beat, like it is listening. This is what the old people called a thin place, a place where the fabric between realms grows fine, not a tear, more like lace. You might think you could see the edge of it, like a shimmer. Sometimes people claim they can, a wavering in the air, a shadow that does not match its owner, a light that dances without flame. But most of the time, the threshold is not seen at all. It is felt. It is the way your skin tightens slightly, as if the world has cooled. It is the way sound changes, muffled, museum-like, the same hush you feel among ancient artifacts. And the trouble is that the threshold does not always care who you are. It does not check your intentions. It does not ask if you are ready. Twilight is the hour when mistakes happen. A single step, taken while your mind is elsewhere, and you could find yourself on the other side. In Tir Nanog, they say, the grass is brighter and the water is clearer, and the air hums with a gentle energy that feeds you the way sleep feeds you. There is no hunger in the ordinary sense. There is no ache of aging the way our bones learn it, year by year. And that sounds like comfort, does it not? But there is a quiet catastrophe hidden inside that comfort. Time does not match. A night can be a year can be a breath, And when you return, if you return, your home may have shifted. Your friends may have grown older. Your name may have become a story told by someone else. Not because the fair folk are cruel in a loud way, but because their world is not built to hold mortal hours gently. Their world is built on deep time, on cycles that do not count your days the way you do. So many old tales begin with someone wandering, a hunter following a deer, a child chasing a ball, a tired traveler taking shelter from rain near a mound. Ordinary reasons, ordinary footsteps, and then the seam opens. I want you to feel how soft the opening is. No crash, no screaming, just a change in the air, a sweeter scent, a different angle of light, a silence that feels carefully arranged. The hill might still be a hill to anyone passing at a distance, but to you, close enough, it becomes something else. A doorway shaped like earth, a passage shaped like a sigh. If you listen, you can almost hear the Tuatha De Danann inside their hidden halls, not yet diminished, not yet forced into secrecy. You can almost hear the singing metal, the footfalls of supernatural horses that make the ground tremble, not violently, but like a deep drum heard through layers of soil. And you can sense, too, that this will not last, that something is coming. A different kind of people, a different relationship to the land, the cold certainty of iron. Before we leave this first doorway, let me linger a little longer on who lived behind it, because their brightness is part of the darkness later. The Tuatha De Danann are described as masters of arts that feel like dreams when you try to picture them. Their druids held the secret names of things, names that were not just labels, but keys. Say the right name, and the wind might change direction, whisper another, and the surface of a lake could go still as glass, reflecting stars that were not yet in the sky. Their warriors carried weapons that seemed to belong to a different physics. Spears that did not miss, swords that could cut through the idea of armor, a cauldron that could restore the fallen, though the old stories are careful, as if even they are uneasy about that kind of power. And their horses, when they moved, the ground did not shake like an earthquake. It shivered like a drumhead, touched by a fingertip, deep and distant, a vibration you feel more than hear. Even their buildings were alive in a way that makes you slow down when you imagine it. Crystal walls that were not cold, but bright, warmed by an inner glow like coals behind ash. Metals that sang with a soft note when someone passed, the way a wine glass hums when you brush its rim. Corridors that widened or narrowed as if listening to your breath. Rooms that held the scent of rain, even when no rain had fallen, because the air there could be guided and shaped like music. And the most unsettling thing to me has always been how gentle it all seems. There is no need for them to rush, no need to raise voices. Power that ancient does not shout. It waits. It waits in the hills. It waits in the burial mounds. It waits in the places where clay has been packed and layered, generation after generation, until the earth becomes a kind of archive. If you ran your fingertips along the ground, you might feel it, not as a pulse exactly, more like the aftertaste of a bell that rang a long time ago and never quite stopped. So when I say the seam between worlds is thin, I do not mean it is fragile. Thin things can be strong. A thin blade can cut. A thin veil can hide. That is why people learned to watch for signs. Little signs, the way you watch for a change in candle flame when someone opens a door in another room. Sometimes it is the sudden bloom of flowers when frost should rule. Sometimes it is a ring of mushrooms, perfectly spaced, as if a compass traced them. Sometimes it is the way your own thoughts drift, as if someone has leaned close and exhaled near your ear. And sometimes it is simply the quietness, the museum hush of a place that feels curated, protected, kept. If you were here beside me, I would pour you something warm. I would let you wrap your hands around the cup and feel the ceramic hold heat. I would let the simple comfort of that weight remind you where you are. Here, safe, in this room, listening. Because the old stories love to lure us outward, toward mounds and stone circles and moonlit water. But we can hold them at a distance, like we hold a shadow on the wall. Interesting, but not dangerous. Still, somewhere out there, beyond the firelight, beyond the last fence line, there is a hill that looks like any other hill. And in the thin hour, when dusk turns to night, the hill remembers its first owners. For now, though, stay with me by the fire. Let the hill remain at a safe distance in your mind. Let the music be only a faint thread. Let your breathing slow again, in and out, as if you are smoothing dust from an old page with the side of your hand. Because next, we will step closer to the bright, impossible cities of the Tuatha De Danann, and we will feel the moment when the mortal world begins to press against them. The way water presses against a door, patient and unstoppable. The fire keeps working quietly, turning wood into ember, ember into ash, ash into finer ash, until everything becomes soft powder. That is one of the oldest patterns in the world. Solid becoming dust, dust settling into clay, clay hardening again. The same story told in different textures, and in the old Irish telling, even the divine had to learn that pattern. The Tuatha De Danann, for all their light and skill, did not remain alone on the surface of Ireland forever. The stories say another people arrived, mortals, ancestors of the Irish, sometimes called the Milesians. It is a mythic name, and the details drift between versions, as myths do. But the turning point stays steady, a human presence that could not be unmade, not easily, not cleanly, not at all. I want you to picture that arrival without the harshness we usually give to conquest. Picture it like weather arriving, like a front of cold air slipping over a field while the sun is still shining. A distant line of sails on gray water, a creak of wood, the smell of salt, the steady slap of waves, the soft thud of a boat touching shore, footsteps on sand, then on stone, then on grass. Ordinary feet, mortal weight. There is something almost heartbreaking about it, because the humans do not come in the story as villains with black eyes. They come as people, hungry, determined, bound to the physical world in a way the Tuatha are not, and that difference matters. The Tuatha could shape weather, yes, and transform themselves, yes, and move between worlds like a thought. But the mortals brought iron. They brought a different kind of permanence. They brought the blunt insistence of bodies that must eat, build, sleep, and bury their dead in the same soil year after year until the soil recognizes them. Some tales say the Tuatha fought with storms, that their druids turned day to night, and their warriors moved like living lightning, their weapons trailing fire and shadow. Some tales claim rivers changed course, forests withered, mountains split, and the land itself kept the scars. We cannot be sure how much of that is memory, how much is symbolism, how much is a poetic way of saying that a people felt their world being rearranged. But even the symbolism is heavy. It tells you the conflict was not small. It tells you the world did not stay the same afterwards. If you were standing there, on a ridge, above the fighting, you might notice details that do not sound like battles at all. You might notice the smell of wet earth thrown into the air, the way fog clings to a valley and then suddenly lifts, not because of wind, but because something powerful passed through it. You might notice the strange hush between sounds, those brief moments when even birds do not call, as if the land is listening, deciding what it will allow. And you might feel fear, yes, but also a kind of awe that makes your breathing slow, because there are forces at work too large for a single heartbeat to command. For a time, the Tuatha resisted. Then, something quieter happened. Recognition. The myths say the Tuatha realized they could not simply erase the mortals. The humans were too woven into the physical world, like stones and rivers. Iron tools cut furrows, fires burned, families formed, names spread. And the Tuatha, who loved the land in their own way, faced a choice that feels almost tender when you think about it. Continue the war and ruin what they wished to keep, or change. So they withdrew, not with horns and banners, with a turning of the body, with a closing of doors, with a retreat into the hollow hills. This is where the story becomes one of the darkest kinds of collapse, the kind that happens without a single visible explosion. A civilization stepping back from daylight, a shining court becoming a hidden court. The Tuatha did not die, the tales say. They diminished. They folded themselves into the earth and into the seams between worlds. They took the great burial mounds and hill forts, the Seelie, and they made them more than earthworks. They made them gates. Outside, a mound might look like a modest rise, a place where grass grows a little thicker. Inside might be a palace. If you could walk there, down a sloping passage that smells of clay and old stone, you would feel the air change around you, warmer, softer, almost sweet. You would hear water running somewhere, clear and steady, as if an underground spring has been speaking for centuries and never lost its voice. A single chamber could open into another chamber, and another, and another, until space stops behaving like space. A hill the size of a cottage from the outside might hold halls like a city. That is the kind of geometry that makes mortals uneasy. It makes your mind search for edges and find none. Time, too, loosens underground. A night in a fairy hall might equal years above, or a decade might pass below, while only moments slip by in the daylight world. You can feel why this became the great warning in so many stories. Not claws, not teeth, just the slipping of time and the soft theft of ordinary life. And yet, the Tuatha, in their new hidden role, were not simply enemies of humans. They became influences, subtle, dreamlike. The tales say they reached up into the mortal world through omens, through the strange logic of chance, through the sudden feeling that you are not alone when you walk beside a river at dusk. They could grant favor. They could withdraw it. They could bless a harvest or let it fail, always with that same quietness, that same sense of a hand turning a page rather than tearing it. This new arrangement required rules, and the Celts, who paid attention, learned those rules the way you learn a landscape, by walking it slowly. There were places where the barrier between worlds was thin. Stone circles, those patient rings of standing rock, could become doorways when the light was right. The spaces between the stones were not empty then. They were passages. Single standing stones, weathered and cold, could mark a spot where another world pressed close, as if it leaned its forehead against ours. Certain lakes, especially the ones with no visible inlet or outlet, carried a feeling of held breath. People said there were underwater ways into the other world there, and I admit, I have stood by such water and felt that strange calm that is almost fear, the way the surface reflects clouds like a mirror, and you cannot quite believe the water is only water. Springs rising from deep sources were treated with respect, because their waters were thought to carry messages, gifts, sometimes healing, sometimes warning. Forests, too, could become thresholds, especially where oak, ash, and thorn grew close together, a triad of trees that seemed to make the air shimmer at the edge of vision. The signs were small, but once you knew them, you could not forget them. Flowers out of season, animals behaving oddly, pausing to watch you as if weighing you. Sudden cold or warmth with no weather to explain it. Music with no source. Lights without flame. Shadows shifting a little out of time with their owners. And then there were the nights when the whole land became thin. The old calendar named 4 great hinge times. Festivals when the seams loosened. Samhain, Beltane, Imbolc, Ludnasad. Even the names feel like footsteps on old stone. Samhain, the turn from harvest into winter, was the most powerful and the most risky, the year dying. Darkness taking more of the day. On Samhain nights, the stories say, the Tuatha emerged in processions, riders crossing frost-silvered ground, hooves striking sparks, hunting parties moving like weather through the countryside, courts held in ruins and abandoned places that had once belonged to them. And the dead, too, were said to walk more freely then, not in a graphic way, not as walking corpses, but as presences, memories that could be felt, like a chill on the back of your neck, like a scent that makes you think of someone long gone. If you were a mortal and you heard the approaching sound of horses and hounds on Samhain, the old advice was simple. Do not look, do not call out, do not stand in the doorway. Go inside, close the shutters, let the house become a small, safe cave. Lie down if you must. Face the floor, cover your head, wait until the sounds fade. It is not only fear that guides that advice, it is respect. The understanding that there are laws older than personal bravery. Beltane, in contrast, carried the warmth of returning life. The otherworldly presence, then, was said to bless fields and herds, to bring inspiration, to bring growth. People lit fires, walked cattle between them, watched smoke curl upward like a prayer. Imbolc held a quieter kind of renewal, more contemplative, as if the land was still asleep but dreaming of spring. Lugnasad, the first harvest, brought tests of hospitality and generosity, stories of strangers who might be more than they seem, asking for food, for a place by the hearth, watching how a household treats a visitor. All of it sounds like folklore, and it is, but it is also a map of human anxiety, is it not? A way of saying, be kind, be cautious, pay attention, do not grow arrogant, because in these tales, arrogance is what draws the darker court. And yes, by now the Tuatha De Danann are no longer spoken of as gods in public light. They have become the fairy folk, the hidden rulers, the ones behind the hill. They reorganize, the stories say, into courts that mirror the balance of seasons. The Seelie, associated with light and growth, and the Unseelie, associated with winter, endings, and correction. We will move toward those courts soon, but for now, I want you to feel the quiet tragedy of the withdrawal itself. Imagine standing on an ordinary morning after the great change. The fields are there, the rivers are there, the sky is there, but something has gone inward. A song that used to float in the air has settled under the ground. A bright presence has folded into shadow, and humans go on living above it, plowing, building, counting their days, not always knowing what lies beneath their feet. That is how the Sidhe become more than hills. They become doors that pretend to be earth. They become the reason a traveler feels uneasy beside a mound at dusk, even if he cannot say why. They become the reason a child might fall silent for a moment while playing in a field, head tilted, as if listening to distant music. Let me give you a small, slow vignette, the kind that sits inside the bigger myth like a pebble in a pocket. Picture a lone traveler in late autumn, boots soaked, cloak heavy, hair damp against his forehead. He has been walking since morning, and the daylight is thinned, that same pewter hour, and the world smells of leaf mold and cold stone. He sees a mound ahead, not grand, not dramatic, just a rounded rise, with thorn bushes at its shoulder and a seam of darker grass along its base. He tells himself it is only a hill. Still, he slows. His footsteps soften as if the ground has become carpet. Even the wind seems to lower its voice. A small light appears near the mound. Not a torch, not a lantern. He can name. More like a pearl of candlelight hovering close to the earth. It drifts a little, then steadies, as if waiting for him to decide. And you know that feeling, When a door is opened somewhere in a house and you can sense it from down the hall, the way the air changes, he feels that. The museum hush arrives, sudden and complete. He could turn away. He should, perhaps, but he is tired, and the light is gentle, and the mound looks warm in a way earth should not look warm. He steps closer. The scent changes. Sweet, like crushed apples, like honey warmed near a fire. His fingertips brush the grass, and for a moment it feels like velvet. Then the grass yields, not tearing, simply parting, as if it has always been a curtain. Inside, there is calm, and a corridor sloping down into darkness that is not frightening, only deep. A cup is offered by a figure whose beauty asks for silence. The liquid shines pale gold. If he drinks, the stories warn, he may forget the taste of ordinary time, and that is the dark tenderness of it. No one forces the cup into his hands. The danger is gentle. It is the softness of invitation. It is the warmth of a place that is not built for mortal hours. He hesitates, thinking of home, thinking of the shrinking numbers of his days, and the candlelight seems to lean closer. Patient, patient. Let your breathing stay slow while you hold that image. A world within a world, dust on the surface, crystal beneath, water running in the dark, candlelight reflected in your mind like a small, steady star. And somewhere out there, on a night when the seam is thin, a procession moving across the land, with the soft authority of a law that does not need to speak loudly. In the next part, we will begin to meet the courts more closely, and we will learn how favor becomes obligation, how gifts become binding, and why even kindness can have a price when it comes from the hidden hills. The night outside the cottage has settled into something thick and velvety, and the fire beside us is doing what fires always do, taking the sharp edges off the world. If you listen closely, there is a rhythm to it, a soft crackle, a sigh, then a pause, like the room itself is breathing. And it is in pauses like these that the old stories slip closer. So, in that time after the Tuatha withdrew, after the surface world became mostly human, the hidden world did not vanish. It reorganized, like a river that disappears into limestone and keeps flowing underground. The fairy realm continued, only quieter, only harder to measure. The people of the city were no longer spoken of openly as gods. They became fairy folk, a word that sounds light, almost playful, until you remember what it really means in these traditions. A society of power, living beside you, under you, inside the hills, operating on laws that do not bend for human comfort. The tales gather those hidden rulers into two great courts, not simply political factions, but forces that mirror the turning of the year. The bright half, the dark half, the Seelie court, they said, carries the influence of growth, blessing, and sunlight filtered through oak leaves. And the Seelie move most freely when the world is green, when lambs are born, when rivers run lively and not sluggish with ice. From spring equinox through harvest, their power rises like morning light across wet fields. The Unseelie court belongs to the other season, the hard season, the time when breath fogs and the last flowers collapse into dark soil. From autumn equinox through the end of winter, their influence thickens, and the nights belong to them more than they belong to you. It is tempting to label one good and one evil, but the old stories resist that. They speak instead of balance, of debts and gifts, of obligations that must be kept, not because someone is smiling or snarling, but because reciprocity is the spine of the cosmos. Still, the Seelie can feel kinder. Their kindness, though, is not casual. It has rules. If you were standing here with me, right on the edge of that old belief, you could almost feel how practical it was. A community needed language for the way fortune arrives and leaves. They needed a way to teach children caution without giving them nightmares. So they talked about courts, and they talked about rules, and they made those rules tangible with tiny rituals. Imagine a small cottage like this one. But centuries ago, a thatched roof wet with rain. A woman steps outside before dawn. Her bare feet touch cold earth, and she pauses, listening. There is a sound in the distance that is not the river and not the wind. A thin music like a single string being plucked and released. She does not chase it. She just stands there, breathing steam into the dark, and she whispers a polite greeting into the air, not naming anyone, simply acknowledging that she is not alone in the world. Then she goes to the byre with a clay bowl, milk still warm from the cow, fogging the rim. She sets a little aside on a flat stone by the threshold, not as worship, not as fear, but as habit, a payment in advance for peace. The bowl sits there while the sky lightens. A robin lands nearby. The fire inside the house cracks, and the woman feels, the way you feel the pressure change before a storm, that something has accepted the offering. Nothing dramatic, just a loosening in the chest. A good day made slightly more likely. This is how the Seelie are often felt. A soft insistence that courtesy matters, that arrogance is loud and easily heard, and sometimes the encounter is closer. A young man walks a path that cuts between two hills. The grass is wet enough to soak his boots. His cloak clings to his shoulders. He hears water dripping from a stone ledge, a metronome in the gray morning. He is thinking only of his own troubles, his own hunger, his own plans, when he notices a ring of mushrooms ahead, perfectly spaced, too perfect. He stops. His breath slows. He remembers what his grandmother said with a little laugh as she stirred porridge. Don't step inside a ring unless you are ready to lose your place in time. So he steps around it, careful as if he is walking around a sleeping animal. And as he passes, the air shifts, and for a heartbeat he smells something impossible. Summer flowers in a rainy autumn. A voice, not in his ear, but inside the soft space of his mind, murmurs a wordless approval. Not praise, just recognition. He gets home safely. Later he tells himself it was his imagination, but he does not forget the smell. He does not forget how quiet the birds became for that one heartbeat. That quiet is a signature moment in these stories. The hush before the veil lifts, the breath held by the land itself. With the Unseelie, the signature moment is different. It is a tightening, like the world turning its face away. A woman borrows a tool and does not return it, not because she is cruel, only because she is tired and busy and forgetful. Days pass. A cold patch appears in her home. No matter how she feeds the hearth, the room never quite warms. Her children cough in the night. Her dog whines at the corner near the door. She begins to feel watched, not by eyes, but by consequence. Finally, she remembers. She walks through the damp fields to the neighbor's house. She returns the tool with a small gift, a loaf of bread still steaming, and she apologizes in a voice that trembles just slightly. That night, the cold patch fades. The dog sleeps. The cough softens. In folk imagination, the Unseelie are the ones who make you remember what you wanted to forget. They are winter teachers. They do not flatter. They correct. And correction, in these tales, can take the shape of the hunt. People describe hearing it the way you might hear thunder far out at sea. First a vibration, almost below sound, then a horn that seems to bend around corners, then the hounds, their cries cutting through everything else, so clean it feels like it is slicing the air into strips. If you were a child in a village and you heard that sound, you would not be told a story of slaughter. You would be told to come inside, to sit close to the fire, to keep your hands still, to avoid the window. And the adults would go quiet too, not because they expected something to tear the door down, but because silence is a form of respect, and respect is a form of protection. It is strange, isn't it, how so many cultures teach the same lesson. When something vast moves past your house, do not challenge it. Let it pass. Let it be. Even now, in a modern world, we still do it with storms. We draw the curtains, we breathe, we wait. I picture their court like a long corridor of crystal, the walls holding a gentle inner glow, as if moonlight has been soaked into stone. The air would smell of clean water and crushed leaves. Somewhere, a harp would be sounding, not loud, never loud, but steady enough to slow your thoughts. They offer help. A traveler lost in fog meets a stranger who points the way, and the fog parts just enough for the path to show itself. A farmer, careful with his land, wakes to find his seed taking root as if invisible hands smooth the soil. A craftsperson wakes with a new understanding in their fingers, as if the night placed a lesson there gently, without words. Yet each gift carries an expectation. Do not boast about what you were given. Do not take credit for what was not yours. Leave a portion of the harvest untouched, a small corner of wildness, as if it belongs to someone else. Keep the rhythm of exchange. When gratitude is broken, the Seelie respond like weather turning. Luck fades. A field that had flourished seems to forget how to grow. A merchant who pretends ordinary goods are fairy blessed finds their stock turned into dead leaves and brittle straw. Poetic justice, shaped to fit the transgression like a key shaped to fit a lock. Now, breathe slowly with me, in and out. Because when we turn our gaze to the Unseelie court, it is easy for the mind to tighten. So we will approach them the way we approach a winter night, rapt, calm, observant. The Unseelie are not mindless monsters in the older lore. They are the court of hard truths. They ride when frost holds the ground stiff, when the air itself seems to sharpen. They test mortals, and their tests can feel like a streak of misfortune. Illness that arrives without reason, accidents that seem too neatly timed, bad luck that presses an arrogant person into humility. And when they move through the world, they prefer the places where certainty is thin. Deep caves, ruins reclaimed by ivy, old burial grounds where names have blurred on stone. Their hunting parties are described with a dreadful elegance. Dark cloaks that drink candlelight, horses whose hooves leave no tracks, hounds larger than wolves, eyes like coals, breath steaming in the cold. The hunt is a recurring shadow in these stories, always carrying the same message. There are powers moving beyond your control, and you should keep your promises. At the apex of each court, the tales place a king and queen, figures so immense in authority that even seeing them might shift a mortal's sense of reality. The Seelie queen is beauty made severe, a crown woven from living vines that bear flowers of every season at once, robes that change color with the moods of nature, a voice that can quiet a room with one syllable. When she rides, fairy rings bloom in grass, birds sing as if morning has been called early. The Unseelie king is equal majesty, but colder, a warrior in armor forged from shadow, or an ancient judge with eyes that have watched countless winters. When he leads the winter hunt, frost arrives like an order given to the land. Beneath them, the courts form a strict hierarchy. Nobles who oversee forests and lakes, messengers who cross borders, guardians who keep intruders out, scholars who preserve knowledge in libraries no human has ever mapped. Even the lesser ones can appear almost human, yet never quite. Their eyes catch light differently. Their voices hold harmonics the throat should not make. Sometimes their footprints are wrong. Sometimes they leave none at all. And so people learned behaviors that sound like superstition until you imagine standing alone on a road at dusk. Do not step into a fairy ring. Do not speak with arrogance near a mound. Do not cut a hawthorn growing on a rise. Leave a small offering, a little milk, a piece of bread, something that says, I recognize this land is not entirely mine. The deeper law behind all of it is honor. The fairy courts are bound by a code so rigid it becomes a substitute for death. If you cannot die, you need other forms of finality. You need oaths that bite. When a fairy breaks an oath, the punishment is quiet and terrible. Power drains from them like water from a cracked cup. They are reduced, not killed, reduced, forced down into a lesser state of being, an exile that feels like winter inside the self. Humans who make agreements with the fairy folk meet the same strictness. Contracts are literal, words matter. A promise becomes a chain. And that brings us to one of the most haunting images in the whole tradition, the wild hunt. Some nights, especially around Samhain, when the year turns and the air tastes of smoke and cold apples, the hunt is said to ride. Not a few riders, but a procession vast enough to feel like weather. Hooves, horns, hounds, a sound that arrives in the bones before it reaches the ears. In Welsh tradition, the name Gwyn ap Nudd rises often. A leader of the hunt, a king, a guide of souls, his role debated and shifting as myths do. Some tales make him a keeper of passageways between life and whatever comes next. When he appears, he rides as if the world cannot decide whether he belongs to light or shadow. His armor catching starlight in one angle, swallowing it in another. His hounds are impossible creatures, their coats pale or dark as cloud, their eyes like embers. Their howls travel too far, too clean, as if sound itself is being guided. And mortals, hearing it approach, were taught the simplest ritual of survival. Do not look, do not call, do not interfere, find shelter. Iron may help, they said. A nail in the frame, a blade in a pocket, because iron disrupts the otherworldly. But even iron is not certainty if a person carries deep guilt, deep debt, a spirit already tangled in obligation. Picture a winter lane, hedges on either side, the moon hidden, the air so cold it feels like glass. You are walking home, thinking only of warmth and bread, and then the sound arrives. Shadows pass above the hedges like a storm. If you look, you might be seen. If you are seen, you might be chosen. And then, like fog, it passes. The lane is empty again. Only the cold remains. Only your breath, fogging the air in small clouds, reminding you you are still here. I want you to feel yourself here, now, beside the fire, hands relaxed, shoulders heavy with calm, because the hidden society is not only fear, it is exchange, gift and cost, beauty and law. And in our next part, we will watch how a new faith spreads across the land, how monasteries rise, how scribes write, and how the old powers are reshaped, not destroyed, reshaped, pressed into new forms that can survive beneath church bells and iron tools. The fire has dropped into a quieter phase now, more ember than flame, and the room feels like the inside of a pocket. That is the mood I like for this part, because what happens next in the old tradition is not a single battle, not a dramatic collapse you can point to. It is a long transformation, a slow rewriting, a dimming, not of power exactly, but of how power is permitted to appear. Christianity arrives in the Celtic lands like a new kind of architecture. Stone churches where sacred groves once stood, monasteries rising from cleared forest, bells replacing certain old rhythms, not everywhere at once, not in a single clean line, but steadily enough that the landscape begins to sound different. And the old stories, the ones people told by firelight, did not vanish. They adjusted. They found hiding places. They learned new clothing. It is easy to imagine the new faith attempting to stamp out the old completely. Sometimes it did, in certain moments, with harshness. But another method appears again and again in the historical record and in the folk process. Absorption, transformation. Take the old figure, keep what people cannot bear to lose, and redirect the worship into a form that can exist under the new sky. The divine diminishment begins subtly, A god becomes a hero, a goddess becomes a saint, a sovereign power becomes a fairy queen. It is as if the story is being turned down like a lamp, not extinguished, just lowered, until it no longer offends those who want the room to look a certain way. Bridget is the cleanest example, and also the strangest, because her presence refuses to disappear. In the older tradition, she is a triple goddess, tied to smithcraft, poetry, healing. Think of those domains for a moment. The forge, where iron is made and shaped, where fire is contained and used. The poem, where memory is preserved, where words become a kind of magic. The healing hand, where suffering is eased. She touches the most human needs, so perhaps that is why she survives. In Christian Ireland, she becomes Street, Bridget of Kildare. And the transformation is not simply a replacement, it is a careful layering. The sacred flame continues to burn, tended now by nuns rather than druids, but still burning, still quietly defiant of time. She becomes patron of craftspeople, of scholars, of those who need protection for animals and wells. Officially, she is a saint. Unofficially, in the folk imagination, she remains something older, something that can appear in dreams, something that can be felt as a sudden spring rising where the earth should be dry. If you were walking through the countryside in early Imbolc, when winter is loosening its hold but the air still bites, you might pass a well with ribbons tied nearby, small offerings, small gestures. You might smell cold water and damp stone. You might hear the wind scraping lightly at thorn branches, and you might think, without quite deciding to, of Bridget, not a theological thought, not a doctrine, but a feeling of protection hovering at the edge of the place, as if a tall figure in shifting robes is standing just outside your vision, watching over lambs, watching over the first stirrings of green. That is how a goddess becomes a saint and remains a goddess anyway, in the hush between official words. Lug is a more complicated case. He is master of skills, patron of kingship, the one who seems to excel at everything. War, craft, music, games, leadership. A figure like that does not fit easily inside a new religion that wants authority to come from a different source, so his essence disperses. Some of his warrior aspect slides into the stories of warrior saints and angelic figures. Some of his craft mastery becomes patronage spread across guild saints. Some of his royal legitimacy is absorbed into Christian ideas of divine appointment. And yet folk tradition does not like dispersal. Folk tradition gathers. So Lug returns as something else. The archetypal fairy craftsman, the mysterious advisor, a figure who can step into a workshop, glance at a tool, and understand it completely. A figure whose hands can shape metal that stays sharp, wood that never warps, cloth that resists water yet remains soft. He appears in dreams to rulers in trouble, offering counsel that arrives as riddle and symbol, testing the king's mind as much as guiding it. The harvest festival Lugnasad continues too. Even when priests would rather it redirect, people still feel the hinge in the year. They still sense the air change, the way late summer tastes different, and the old name hangs on the season like a thread that refuses to snap. Then there is the Morrigan, and here the transformation becomes darker, more uneasy, because she is tied to war, fate, and death. A triple nature again, appearing as battle crow, as sovereignty, as frenzy. How do you fold that into saintly devotion? You do not cleanly. So the stories reduce her status instead of redirecting her worship. They reshape her into a fairy queen of the Unseelie, still powerful, still terrifying in her own calm way, but no longer openly divine. Her three aspects, in some tellings, split into separate queens, ruling different regions of the otherworld. Sisters bound by an ancient shared authority. She can appear as a beautiful woman or as a crow. She watches battlefields, not to splash in gore, but to witness the turning of fate. She offers weapons or guidance to warriors she favors, and she withdraws favor from the arrogant. She tests kings. She withholds legitimacy from those who would rule selfishly. In dreams, she asks questions that feel like cold water on the skin. What will you sacrifice? What will you protect? What do you think power is for? Now imagine medieval scribes, monks, or court scholars, hunched over parchment in candlelight much like ours. Their quills scratch. Ink smells sharp, metallic. The room is cold enough that breath might show if the door opens. And outside, the wind drags itself along stone walls, like a slow animal. These scribes are preserving the old tales, but they are also altering them, sometimes consciously, to align them with Christian teaching, sometimes unconsciously, because writing itself forces compression. Oral stories can wander, can linger on atmosphere, can add a dozen side paths. Parchment is expensive. Time is limited. A scribe trims. A scribe chooses the central spine and leaves the rest to fade. This is one of those quiet catastrophes I mentioned earlier. Not a burning city, a narrowing of memory. Yet even narrowing preserves something. The manuscript becomes a vessel that carries the transformed gods into later centuries. And illuminated manuscripts add another layer. Images of otherworldly beings framed by Celtic knots, spirals, sacred geometry. The art itself becomes a bridge, letting pre-Christian motifs live inside Christian books like roots hidden under a stone floor. Across regions, versions differ. One monastery emphasizes the triumph of a saint over a pagan spirit. Another keeps a softer ambiguity, where the supernatural could be miracle or fairy encounter, depending on the reader's mind. That ambiguity matters. It leaves the seam between worlds open just enough for folk tradition to breathe through. Certain attributes prove stubborn. Shape-shifting persists. Prophecy persists. Weather control persists. The dominion over specific natural places persists. Those are the old divine muscles that do not atrophy, even when the name changes. And this is where the fairy ecosystem becomes dense. The old powers, now constrained, concentrate in domains. A queen of a particular lake, a lord of a particular forest, a guardian of a mountain pass, a spirit bound not to the whole world, but to one stretch of coastline, one mound, one deep pool. Territory becomes everything. Boundaries become sacred. Crossings become risky. The water, especially, holds some of the most haunting beings. Water is already a threshold, even in ordinary life. It reflects. It hides depth. It carries sound in strange ways. In these traditions, water is a doorway that never quite closes. And so we begin to hear about spirits tied to water, some gentle, some dangerous. We begin to hear the name Banshee, the Bean Sidhe, a woman of the fairy mound, a herald of death, not a killer, not a monster with dripping mouth, but a presence, a sound, a keening that arrives like wind through a keyhole. Her origin, the stories suggest, reaches back to sovereignty and war goddesses, now reduced to a role bound to certain families. She appears before a death in that lineage. Her age shifts with the nature of the death, a young maiden for a young warrior, an old crone for an elder. And the sound she makes is not merely warning, but record. Grief shaped into music that helps a soul loosen its ties. There are Selkies too, seal people along coasts, moving between sea and land by the removal of a skin. Their beauty on land is a strange echo of the sea. Dark hair, deep eyes, movements that feel like waves. Their skin is not just clothing, it is identity. If a mortal steals it, the Selkie becomes trapped, diminished, more mortal, with every season away from salt water. Some stories tell of forced marriages and the sorrow that follows, but we can hold that sorrow gently, as a lesson about coercion, and the way the sea always calls its own back. If a skin is returned, gratitude can become protection, guidance to safe fishing grounds, warnings of storms. There are marrows in lakes and rivers, guardians of waters, stewards of fish and flood. They can bless a community that treats a river with respect. They can oppose mills and bridges built without consent, turning projects into failures, not with explosions, but with constant small mishaps that wear down human determination. They are a reminder that water is not only resource, water is relationship. And there are darker water beings too, like the Kelpie, a water horse that appears magnificent, inviting, a solution to a tired traveler's needs. Its coat seems to shift under moonlight. Its eyes hold too much intelligence. If a person mounts it, they may find they cannot dismount, as if the skin itself has become glue, and the horse moves toward deep water with a calm patience that feels dreadful. The old stories use this creature as a warning about trusting beauty near dark water, about not accepting every offered ride, about listening to teen. The smallest wrong detail, hooves that leave wet prints on dry ground, a chill that arrives with no wind. On land, other beings work different lessons, leprechauns as craftsmen and treasure guardians, their workshops expanding impossibly inside small caves. Cluricons tied to cellars and fermentation, protecting drink stores, punishing thieves by making corridors twist, making footsteps lead nowhere. Tricksters in red, fearsome in their mischief, testing travelers at crossroads, asking questions that reveal character more than knowledge. Above, in the air, there are lights that dance. Willow, the wisps that can guide or mislead, depending on who made them and what you deserve. And there are restless hosts of spirits, like the sluag, souls denied rest, moving like a dark cloud against the wind, bringing that sudden temperature drop, that feeling of being observed. Do you see what has happened? A pantheon has become a landscape. Divinities have become a web of localized presences. The old world did not disappear. It fractured into the hills, the rivers, the ruins, the fog, and humans, living among churches and iron tools, kept feeling those presences anyway. They kept leaving offerings. They kept telling children not to play on certain mounds at dusk. They kept listening for music with no source. They kept watching the year for the hinge times when the seam grows thin. If you let your mind rest on this, it begins to feel less like a conflict between religions and more like a quiet negotiation between ways of seeing. One way tries to make the world singular. The other insists the world is layered. The layered way survives best in whispers. So as the bells ring in the distance and the monastery scribes write by candlelight, the fairy courts continue beneath the ground, adapting, narrowing their domains, intensifying their rules. And next, we will begin to walk those domains more closely. Water first, then earth, then air. Meeting the beings not as a list, but as encounters, as little stories you can feel in your skin. A cry on the wind, a light in a bog, a seal skin hidden under a bed of straw, a ring of mushrooms shining pale in moonlight, as if the grass itself is holding a secret. And while we talk, I notice the way candle smoke curls upward, thin as thread, then disappears into darkness above the rafters. That disappearing feels like the perfect symbol for this era. So much becomes invisible, and yet it is still there, shaping the air. Keep listening, softly, as if you are following footsteps over old stone, one careful step at a time. The further we drift into this hidden geography, the more it begins to feel like a map made of sensations instead of lines. If you were here with me, you would notice it first in your body, a slight change in pressure near a river bend, a coolness that slides along your wrists when you pass a spring, a hush that settles over the grass as if the land is holding its breath. People used to call these places thin, not because they looked like cracks in the world, but because the ordinary rules felt worn there, as if many feet had walked the same invisible threshold. A stone circle on a hill where wind always seems to turn. A lone standing stone in a field that never quite warms in summer. A lake with no inlet and no outlet. Black as ink at dusk, still as a closed eye. And once you accept the idea of thin places, the old stories stop feeling like separate tales. They become one long instruction manual whispered across centuries. Here is where the seam loosens. Here is what you might see. Here is how you survive it without losing yourself. Tonight, I want to take you into the water first. Water is an old mirror. It gives you your face back, but altered, trembling, never perfectly steady. And that trembling is the beginning of otherworldly logic. There is a tradition, especially in Ireland, that certain families have a watcher, not a guardian angel in the church sense, not a simple omen, but a being whose presence is both warning and strange honor. The Bean Side, the Banshee. In the softest versions of the tale, she does not appear as violence. She appears as sound, a keening that rises the way wind rises through reeds, or the way a distant train horn seems to bend the air even when you cannot see the tracks. Some people claimed her cry could split stone. Some people claimed it could turn a river from its course. That is folklore speaking in its exaggerated language, trying to express how final it feels when a life ends. I've always found it strange that the Banshee is so often described with shifting age, as if the story is telling us, in the gentlest way it can, that death is not one face. It is different when it comes for the young, different when it comes for the old, different when it comes for a king, different when it comes for a farmer who never left his valley. Picture a road at night, the kind of road that shines faintly with damp, hedges on either side, the smell of wet leaves and black soil. You are walking home with your cloak pulled tight, thinking only of the warmth you left behind. Then you hear it, not close, not even clearly shaped, just a rise in the air that makes your ribs feel hollow. You stop, your breath hangs in front of you, and you do what the old advice says to do with most supernatural things. You do not answer. You do not challenge. You simply acknowledge, silently, that something has spoken. Then you walk on, slower, as if your steps are prayers. The Banshee, in many tellings, is bound to bloodlines. She knows who belongs to the family she follows. Distance does not protect you. A son can be in a foreign land and still be within her awareness, and in that way, she becomes less a horror and more a reminder. There are threads that remain tied even when you believe you have escaped them. Her keening is also described as a kind of record, as if grief itself is a ledger, written in sound, kept by beings who remember longer than we do. And if you let that settle into you, it becomes almost soothing. Not the idea of death, but the idea that a life is witnessed, that it does not vanish without a mark. Not all water spirits are tied to endings. Some are tied to longing, along the coasts, where the sea breathes and withdraws like a giant animal sleeping. The Selkies appear, seal people. Their stories are often told with a sorrow that feels like tide water moving through a cave, slow, inevitable. They have a skin, a seal skin, that is not merely a disguise, but the key to their true home. On land, without it, they can look human, sometimes almost painfully beautiful in the way myths insist on beauty. Eyes deep as water, hair dark and shining, a movement in the shoulders that feels like swimming even when they are walking. And there is a terrible temptation in some versions of the tale. A fisherman finds a skin hidden among rocks, slick and heavy, still smelling of salt. He hides it, and because the Selkie cannot return to the sea, she remains. A marriage happens. Children are born. Years pass. Then one day, the hidden skin is found, maybe by the Selkie herself, maybe by a child who did not understand what they were holding. And the moment the skin touches her hands, something wakes inside her, something older than any promise she made on land. She goes back to the water, not because she hates the family she made, but because the sea is not a place you can betray forever. It is debated in scholarship how much these tales reflect real historical anxieties. Outsiders, marriages, the dangers of the coast, the way storms take people without explanation. We cannot be sure, but we can feel what the story is trying to teach. Do not trap what is meant to move. Do not mistake your desire for a rightful claim. And if you ever find yourself holding someone's way home in your hand, return it. In kinder versions, the fisherman does return it. He sets the skin on a rock where moonlight can reach it. He turns away and waits. In the morning, the fish come easily into his nets for many seasons, not because he forced the sea to reward him, but because he behaved with the kind of respect that the old stories always favor. Far inland, there are Merrows, guardians of lakes and rivers. They are less like strangers passing through and more like landlords, stewards of their waters. Communities that depended on fishing or clean water learned to approach them with ritual courtesy. A song, a crafted gift, a small offering placed where the reeds begin. And if you were there, standing on a riverbank in the early light, you might notice how quietly a place can change. When it is pleased, the water clears, the fish rise, a fog lifts off the surface as if someone has pulled away a thin blanket. But when a community acts as if a river is only a tool, when it tries to dam without asking, to drain without listening, the Merrow's displeasure arrives not as spectacle, but as friction. Equipment breaks, workers argue, plans fail for reasons no one can fully explain. The river resists the way a body resists when it is harmed. Then, there are the Kelpies, the each-eyesgi water horses. They are the story's sharpest warning about beauty near depth. They appear as magnificent stallions, so perfect you feel your own mouth go dry with desire. Their coats seem to hold moonlight. Their manes move as if underwater, even in air. Their eyes, though, are wrong, not in a monstrous way, but in a calculating way. Too still, too aware. A traveler sees the horse near a river crossing where the bridge has collapsed. The traveler is tired. The traveler is cold. The traveler wants the problem solved, quickly, and that is the bait. If the traveler climbs onto the horse's back, the skin sticks. Hands cannot pull away. The horse steps into the water with patient certainty, and the river, which had been just water a moment ago, becomes a mouth. Again, the old tradition tells it without gore, but the dread is there. It is the dread of realizing you trusted the wrong thing because it looked like an answer. How do you survive a Kelpie tale? By not needing the shortcut, by taking the long way, by listening to small wrongness, hoofprints that fill with water on dry ground, a coldness that arrives even when there is no wind, a smell of lakeweed when you are far from any lake. If you hear this and feel your mind tighten, let the fire settle you in and out. The story is not here to frighten you. It is here to teach your nervous system a gentle skepticism, a soft pause before you say yes. Now we leave the water and step onto earth. And earth, in these tales, is not only dirt and rock. It is the hidden economy of buried things. In the hills and under the roots of old trees, leprechauns work, not as cartoon figures, not as cheap luck charms, but as craftsmen in the deeper sense. Small, yes, because smallness is useful in narrow passages, but not harmless. Their hands are stained with dyes. Their fingers are gnarled from centuries of needlework and leather. Their workshops are places that do not obey ordinary size. A cave mouth that looks modest can open into a hall filled with tools, thread, glowing metal, shelves of shoes that never wear out, and They have treasure, not only gold, but a kind of value that does not rot. Leprechaun gold, in folklore, cannot be counterfeited. It carries a protective stubbornness, but it also carries restrictions. A mortal who tries to take it by force discovers the classic trick. The coin turns to dead leaves at dawn, or to pebbles, or to brittle straw. The wealth was never meant to be stolen. It was meant to be exchanged. This is one of the most important laws in fairy lore. Everything is a transaction, even when it looks like a gift. Cluricons, too, inhabit the spaces of storage, the cellar, the fermenting barrel. They protect a brewer's stock if they are treated well. If the brewer is greedy, if he waters down the ale, if he cheats his customers, the Clurichon's mischief becomes correction. Thieves get lost. Corridors feel longer than they should. A hand reaches for a bottle and finds only air. Intention is monitored as much as action. Fearsome little tricksters in red appear at crossroads and bridges. They ask questions. They offer directions. They create pranks that reveal whether you are kind or cruel. Sometimes the punishment is only embarrassment. Sometimes it is a lesson that stings for years. And above these earthbound beings, the air carries its own restless company. Will-o'-the-wisps flicker in bogs. Some are guides. Some are traps. Some are debated as natural phenomena misread through fear. But in story, they are lights with intention, or at least with consequence. Follow the light, and you may find a safe path, or you may find yourself knee-deep in cold water, far from home, listening to your own breath and wishing you had trusted the stars instead. The Slua move like a cloud of souls denied rest, traveling against the wind. Their passage brings cold, a sense of being watched. They appear at deathbeds, sometimes as if drawn to complicated endings, to debts that must be faced. They whisper, in the story's language, of last chances, of repentance, of the weight of unfinished business. If you put all of this together, you start to see how the fairy realm is less like a separate country and more like a second nervous system running under the landscape. Water nerves, earth nerves, air nerves, each reacting to disrespect, to gratitude, to fear, to humility. And over all of it, the calendar turns. At certain times, the barrier thins everywhere, not only in special places. Samhain, when the year tips into darkness. Beltane, when fertility returns. Imbolc, when winter loosens. Lugnasad, when harvest begins. These are the hinge points where even a practical person might feel something, a stirring, a wrongness in the light, a music that seems to come from the grass. Imagine Samhain night, smoke from hearth fires hangs low. The smell of apples and damp wool. A dog refuses to go outside. You stand at your door and hear, far off, hooves, a horn. Not an ordinary horn, a sound like metal and wind. The wild hunt, some say, moving across the land like a storm. You do not look. You close the door. You touch an iron nail in the frame. You say a prayer if you are Christian, or you whisper a respectful silence if you are not. You let the procession pass. Then, after it passes, the night is somehow quieter than before, as if even the insects have gone still. I want you to notice your own quiet now. The way you're breathing can be a door you choose to keep shut, in and out. Because in the next part, we will leave the map of beings and enter the map of bargains. Gifts that vanish at dawn, beauty that fades at cockcrow, knowledge that costs years, contracts that listen to every syllable, and the cruel tenderness of the changeling stories, where fear and love become tangled in the same human hands. So, if you feel a little chill at the mention of those bargains, let it be a small chill that melts quickly. Let it be like stepping too close to a cold window, then leaning back into the warmth. The old tales never ask you to fight the night. They ask you to move through it with care. Listen to the fire for a moment. A soft pop of resin, the tiny shift of ash, the patient glow. Even in stories filled with hunters and hidden courts, there is always this, the ordinary warmth that keeps returning. And when you are ready, we will follow that warmth forward, right up to the edge of a promise. Promises are strange things. In daylight, they can feel simple, like a sentence said over a table, a handshake, a nod. At night, in the old Celtic imagination, a promise becomes architecture. It becomes a beam in the unseen house that holds the worlds apart. And when a beam cracks, you feel it everywhere. Some scholars argue that this is why fairy stories care so much about oaths, not because the storytellers wanted to sound moral, but because, in a landscape full of invisible borders, language was the safest fence people had. A spoken agreement was a way to keep the unknown from leaning too close. Here, in the firelight, I want you to picture a cottage with a low roof and a door that sticks, the smell of peat smoke, a bowl of oats on the table, a family settling into the end of a long day. Outside, the wind moves through grass like water. Inside, you can hear small domestic sounds, a spoon in a cup, a soft sigh, the crackle of a log. Now imagine that, without anyone seeing the moment it begins, the household becomes part of a transaction. In fairy lore, gifts are rarely free. They are beautiful. They are tempting. They can arrive exactly when you need them most, and that is what makes them dangerous. Not because they are evil, but because they bind you. A farmer might wake to find gold coins in his purse, heavy and warm in his palm. The metal shines with a detail no mint could manage. He feels relief spread through him, the loosening of debt, the possibility of buying seed, of repairing a roof. He tells no one, or he tells everyone, or he tells just one person and the news leaks anyway, because secrets leak like smoke. And then, at dawn, the coins become leaves, brown, brittle, smelling faintly of wet earth, or pebbles, or curled bits of bark. The lesson is not only that the fairy gift was temporary. The deeper lesson is quieter. You must decide what you did while the gift was real. Did you feed your neighbors? Did you pay a worker fairly? Did you patch the holes that let cold into the house? Or did you clutch the gold in fear? Let it rot your sleep. Let it make you stingy. The old stories always insist that what you build with a temporary gift can last even after the gift itself is gone. A repaired roof still keeps out rain. A hungry child remembers being fed. A kindness becomes a kind of currency that does not turn to leaves. Beauty is another gift that arrives with hooks. The tales speak of faces made luminous by otherworldly favor, eyes that catch starlight, skin that seems to carry its own lamp, hair that shifts color subtly in candlelight, never quite the same shade twice. Sometimes the gift is said to vanish at cockcrow. You can almost hear the cruelty in that timing. Morning, when the world becomes visible again, when people look at you more closely, when the day demands you be yourself. To have beauty that fades on a schedule is to live with a constant soft panic, to feel loved for a mask, to wonder what happens when the mask falls. Honestly, that feels less like magic and more like a human fear dressed in myth. The fear of being valued only for what changes in a mirror. The fear of being left when the light shifts. So the story offers its own gentle correction. It suggests that a person who learns to be kind while beautiful stays kind when the beauty fades, and a person who becomes cruel while beautiful keeps that cruelty even after the gift disappears. The fairy gift reveals what was already growing. Then there is knowledge, the most dangerous gift because it changes the shape of your mind. A fairy might offer to tell you where a hidden treasure lies, under a stone shaped like a sleeping animal, or the secret name of a plant that heals fever. or the words that make cattle calm so they do not panic in storms, or the location of a thin place, a passage that opens only at twilight on certain nights. In exchange, the price is never just money. It is time, years of your life, a memory you cannot bear to lose, the warmth you feel when you recall your mother's hands, the name of your first friend, the face of someone you loved and failed. The tale is saying, softly, that wisdom costs something, and it asks you to decide what you are willing to pay. There are stories where a man agrees because he is desperate. He gives up 5 years of his life for the answer he needs. The fairy smiles, and the answer comes clear as spring water. The man goes home feeling saved. Then, gradually, he notices it. Not the missing years, because you cannot feel what you never lived, but a faint thinning around the edges of his days. Friends seem older than they should. His own hair is touched with gray earlier than expected. He looks at a child and feels an ache he cannot explain, as if he missed a whole season of that child's growth. And he knows, without anyone telling him, that he has been measured and found payable. Even fairy generosity follows rules. The stories say that if you break the conditions, the gift turns against you. Silver ornaments tarnish instantly. A blessing reverses. A field becomes barren, not because a fairy is throwing a tantrum, but because the contract itself has teeth. And in this blended landscape, protection becomes a layered practice. Iron is the first defense. A horseshoe over the door, a nail in the frame, a small knife in a pocket. Not for violence, just boundary. Rowan, bread, and salt join it. Each one a simple way of saying, this home is closed tonight. But even protection has limits, because the most dangerous binding is not a horseshoe or a line of salt. The most dangerous binding is hospitality, fairy food, fairy drink. In the stories, you are invited into a hall that is larger inside than it is outside. A mound in a field becomes a palace. You step through a doorway that looks like shadow between stones, and suddenly you are walking on floors that shine like wet glass. The air smells of crushed flowers and cold metal. Light seems to come from the walls. Music is everywhere, but gentle, as if it lives in your bloodstream. A table is set. Dishes steam softly. Fruit glows, as if it has trapped summer inside its skin. Wine catches the firelight and holds it. You are hungry, or you are tired, or you are lonely, and the hosts are so beautiful, so attentive, that refusing feels like insulting the universe itself. So you eat. A bite. A sip. At first, it feels like relief. Your body warms. Your mind clears. You feel strong. Unreasonably strong. As if you have been starving for more than food. Then the binding begins. Not like chains. More like a change in the way your cells recognize home. After a while, ordinary bread tastes like dust. Ordinary water tastes flat. You begin to crave the otherworldly taste, the complexity, the strange sweetness that feels like remembering something you never lived, and the craving becomes a quiet leash. Some travelers, the stories say, learned to fake it. They would lift food to their lips and let it fall into their sleeve. They would sip and let the drink spill down their chin, smiling as if they were grateful. Because to refuse openly is to offend, and to offend is to invite the other court, the harsher one, the one that corrects disrespect with winter. Time, too, becomes slippery the moment you cross. A single night of dancing might mean years on earth, or a decade in the hill might equal a heartbeat above ground. You step out and find your cottage collapsed, your friends old, your name spoken with the careful distance people use for the dead. I want you to notice how gently the fear can be held here. It is not the terror of torture. It is the sorrow of misalignment, of living in one rhythm while the world you love moves in another, like waking from a nap and realizing the sun has fallen faster than you expected. Only, in the story, the scale becomes immense. And this is why the tales are filled with taboos. Jessa, Giessa, the binding obligations that give power and demand restraint. A hero forbidden to eat a certain food. A king compelled to offer hospitality to any traveler. A warrior who cannot refuse a challenge. These rules make a life heavy. They force vigilance. But they also make a life meaningful, because the hero's power is not free. It is earned every day by attention. When someone breaks a geis, the downfall is often swift. Not because fate is cruel, but because the story wants to show how a small crack in a promise can collapse an entire structure. A hero eats what he was forbidden to eat, perhaps because he is tricked, perhaps because he is exhausted, perhaps because he wants one small comfort. And in that small moment, the protection drains away. The world feels colder. Enemies find him. Luck turns. And now we come to the most intimate terror in all this lore, the changeling. It is hard to speak of it without feeling the ache that sits underneath it, because the changeling story is not just about fairies. It is about parents confronted with a child who changes, a baby who does not grow, a toddler who seems distant, a sudden illness, a difference that old communities did not know how to name. The tale says, perhaps the fair folk took the child, perhaps they left a substitute, perhaps the true child is in the hill, being raised under strange music. It is a heartbreaking explanation, and a dangerous one, because people sometimes did cruel things under the belief that they were fighting a supernatural theft. We should say that clearly, even in a sleep story. Real history includes harm, and if you feel your chest tighten at that, let the fire take it, in and out, because we are going to hold this carefully. In the gentler tellings, the changeling test is almost absurd. Boiling water in eggshells, hoping the strangeness will coax out an old voice. In story, it becomes proof. In real life, it was often desperation, looking for certainty. There are also negotiation tales. Families leave offerings. They speak respectfully at the edge of a mound. They ask, rather than demand. Sometimes, the story says, the child returns, changed, yes, quiet, yes, as if they have seen light that does not belong to our world. And if the child returns, they often carry gifts that are both blessing and burden. A sensitivity to music, a talent for healing, a strange knowledge of weather, a way of looking at time as if it is not a straight road but a pool, ripples. In those moments, the fairy world is not only a thief, it is a teacher that teaches too sharply. One more danger remains, whispered through all of this. Names. The true name, the authentic name, is said to hold power. To speak it correctly is to call the being's essence, to compel honesty, to demand action. That is why the fair folk use many names, why they cloak themselves in titles, why they offer you a nickname and never the real word. And that is why you, too, must be careful what you offer in return. In the old advice, you give a false name, or you give only part. You keep the core of yourself private, not out of paranoia, but out of a simple understanding. Some things are safer when unnamed. Now listen, all these laws, gifts, contracts, taboos, names, are ways of describing a single dark truth. The fair folk are not chaotic. They are precise. They operate like a court. They remember. They keep accounts. They punish ingratitude not with screaming, but with the quiet withdrawal of luck. And yet, they are also melancholy, immortal beings longing for the weight of endings, envying the way a mortal life becomes meaningful because it stops. That longing makes them curious about us. It makes them reckless sometimes. It makes them offer gifts that bind, because binding is one of the few ways they can feel consequence. If you were standing here with me, you would see the candle flame lean as if listening. You would hear the house settle, and you might realize that the deepest comfort in these stories is not that we can control the other world. It is that we can choose how we behave at the boundary. We can be humble. We can be careful with promises. We can leave a small offering without resentment. We can close the door at Samhain and let the hunt pass. We can refuse the shortcut horse at the river. We can return the sealskin. We can treat a river as a living thing. And when we do, the night becomes less threatening. Not because the unseen disappears, but because our own choices become a steady lantern. So take a breath with me. Feel your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop. The bargains and the fears can stay in the story, neatly folded like cloaks on a hook. Because in the next part, we will return to the great pageantry, the wild hunt in its full procession, the leaders who ride at the edge of death, the rules for surviving an encounter, and the strange possibility that some souls join willingly, not as victims, but as travelers stepping into a darker service that feels, in its own way, like belonging. The night you first hear the wild hunt, you do not understand what you are hearing, not at once. At first it is only a change in the silence, as if the darkness grows denser, the way mist thickens over a field when the air turns cold. If you were standing here with me, beside this fireplace, you would notice the small sounds inside the room and how they suddenly feel far away. A coal settles, a candle wick leans and trembles, dust in the air turns slow, like it is waiting. Outside, there is wind, but the wind seems to have a direction that is not from any ordinary weather. It comes from somewhere behind the world. And then, under it, you catch a rhythm, a pulse of hooves, not the clean sound of a farmer's horse on hard road, but something heavier, as if the ground itself is being persuaded to remember old footsteps. Some people say the hunt belongs to Samhain most of all. Those nights when autumn collapses into winter, when the last warmth of the year thins out, and the fields smell of wet clay and dying leaves. It is the season when, in the old calendar, the seam between worlds is at its loosest. Not an open door, exactly. More like a curtain that lifts at the bottom and lets cold air slide through. When you hear the hunt, the first rule is simple. Do not look. It sounds like a superstition until you imagine how it would feel to meet a force that does not behave like a person, but like a court moving at the speed of storm. The wild hunt is not a single rider. It is a procession, a moving tribunal, a traveling net thrown across the landscape to gather what has been marked. You know that feeling when you are walking at night and you suddenly become aware that you are not alone. Not because you see someone, but because your skin changes. Your neck tightens. Your breath comes smaller. The wild hunt is that feeling made enormous. The stories say that the hunt is led by figures whose power is beyond ordinary fairy. Nobility. Names change by region. In Welsh tradition, you hear of Gwyn Nop Nud, a king and a guide of souls. Other tellings speak of Aron, king of Annan, whose realm touches death and otherworldly law. Sometimes they ride together. Sometimes they compete. Sometimes they appear at different seasons, as if the calendar itself appoints which authority is allowed to speak. I picture Gwyn ap Nud, the way the old texts invite you to imagine him, a rider whose horse shifts between white and black, depending on the work of the night, armor that seems to be made of starlight and shadow, not metal, not cloth, but something between, and a face that is calm, not cruel, not kind, simply certain. The certainty of a being who has watched human lifetimes fall like leaves and has never once been surprised. His hounds come before him, or behind him, or beside him, depending on the angle of fear you stand in. They are too large to be ordinary dogs. They carry colors that do not exist in daylight. A white that glows faintly, as if it holds moonlight inside. A red that pulses like a coal. A black that drinks the light and leaves the air looking emptier where it passes. Their howls are the most unsettling thing, not because they are loud, but because they feel directed, as if the sound knows your name, as if it is sniffing the edges of your life. Aaron, in the telling that makes him the hunt's leader, feels different to me, more like a sovereign of boundaries, a king who knows every passage under the hills and every deep place where water meets stone. His hunt is not only a chase, it is a patrol, a way of keeping the treaty lines bright, the way a farmer keeps the edges of his field clear of bramble. And this is the thing to remember. The wild hunt, in these stories, is not random violence. It is law. Harsh law, yes, but still a system. It collects debts. It enforces oaths. It corrects those who have violated the balance, whether they meant to or not. I've always found that idea both terrifying and strangely calming. Terrifying because it suggests the world is paying attention. Calming because it suggests chaos has limits. When the hunt moves, it carries more than riders and hounds. It carries weather. Frost can arrive in a single breath. Leaves can strip from branches as if the wind is combing them clean. A smell of iron might drift across the road even if you are not holding any. The air itself feels rinsed, scrubbed, emptied. If you are caught outside when the sound approaches, the old instructions become your lifeline. Find shelter if you can. A house, doors shut, windows closed. A church, consecrated ground. If your faith holds steady. A cave, a thicket, a hollow between stones. Something enclosed, something that can pretend, for a moment, to be a world with walls. If there is no shelter, the advice becomes humbler. Lie face down, hands over your head. No movement, not even curiosity. You become, for a few minutes, as small as a stone, and you wait until the sound is gone. Some stories say iron helps. A knife in your pocket, a nail in your boot, a horseshoe above a door. Iron is boundary metal. It belongs to human hands, and fire, and work. It is not of the other world. In the same, so it confuses certain powers, interrupts certain enchantments. Not always. A person with heavy guilt, the tales warn, may find iron cannot save them, but it can help. It can make you less interesting to what rides past. There is also the question of what happens if you do look. It is said that the hunt notices attention, that a glance is a kind of invitation, and if it notices you, the consequences vary. Madness is one word people used, but it is a blunt word. I think it is more like a fracture in your sense of reality. You see the seam. You cannot unsee it. After that, daytime feels too thin. Ordinary conversations feel too slow. Music sounds flat, as if the world has lost half its harmonics. Some people cannot return fully to the rhythm of human life after that. There is another consequence, more direct. Recruitment. This part of the lore is colder than most, but it is also, in a strange way, fair. The hunt does not only steal, it also gathers. Some are taken unwillingly, those who broke a sacred promise, those who mocked a thin place, those who stole from a fairy path and laughed at the stories, those who accumulated debts to the unseen and refused every gentle warning. For them, recruitment is justice. A sentence carried out not in a courtroom, but in a moving storm. They are swept up, the stories say, in a suddenness that leaves no time for goodbye. One moment on a road, the next among riders. Their own feet no longer on earth. Their own breath caught in cold air that tastes of snow and old stone. And then the long work begins. Work that can last years or lifetimes, until the debt is paid or the self is worn down. But some join willingly, and this is the part that I find most unsettling of all. Because it feels too close to human psychology, willing recruits are often those who lived with courage, hunters who respected their quarry, warriors who fought to protect, not to dominate, people who stood between a village and danger without expecting applause. The hunt, in this view, becomes a kind of afterlife service, not heaven, not punishment, a darker duty. They receive warnings, dreams that smell of wet grass, a horn heard far away while they lie in bed, the sound threading through their ribs, a shadow of hounds seen at the edge of a field, not attacking, simply watching, a messenger, perhaps, in a cloak that does not move with the wind, offering a choice with a voice too calm. If the person accepts, the transition is gentler. They keep more of their self. They do not wake in panic. They learn. They adapt. They become something between mortal and otherworldly, able to move across thresholds without losing their name. This difference matters, because the stories are obsessed with identity, who you are, what you owe, what you promised, what you broke. And the hunt is where all of that is weighed. After the hunt passes, the landscape is never quite the same. Even if no one is taken, the air feels scrubbed, as if a judgment has moved through and left an invisible stamp. A house might feel safer, or a house might feel watched. A person might wake the next morning and decide, with a strange seriousness, to fulfill an old promise they had been avoiding. That is how these stories work. They do not only frighten, they adjust behavior. They teach you to respect boundaries you cannot see. Now, let the room be quiet again. Listen to the fire, the slow settling of ash, the small sigh of candle smoke. Let your breathing loosen, because we are not going to ride with the hunt tonight. We are only watching the idea of it drift by like a distant storm. And when you feel your body soften, I want you to carry one gentle thought into the next part. Even the wild hunt, even the most terrifying procession in the lore, is still part of a larger system. Courts, festivals, rules, art, music, craft, a whole hidden civilization that exists beside ours, not only hunting and judging, but also singing, bargaining, longing, and trying, in its immortal way, to make meaning out of endless time. So stay here with me, beside the candlelight and the hush. We will follow the sound until it becomes something else. A song, softer than hooves, drifting up through the floorboards, asking nothing of you, except that you listen. Let me slow it down for you, because in most tellings the hunt is a blur, and blur is where fear lives. So we will make it gentle, almost methodical, like watching rain fall down a window. Picture a narrow lane between hedgerows. The hedges are slick with damp, each leaf holding a bead of water that catches weak moonlight. Your boots are on packed earth, and every step presses a faint scent of soil upward, dark and clean. Somewhere in the distance a stream is talking to stones, that steady whisper that never runs out of words. At first you think the rhythm you hear is thunder. Then you notice the sky is clear. Only that approach, that hoofbeat pattern, as if someone is drumming on the horizon with the flat of a hand. You stop without realizing it. Your shoulders lift. Your breath catches. Then you remember to let it out. Slowly, the lane becomes wider. Not in distance, but in feeling, as if the world is holding space. The birds go quiet. Even insects pause. The usual night noises step back, respectfully, as if something with authority has entered the room. Now the hoofbeats come close enough that you start to hear the small details inside them. The strike of shoe against stone, the splash through shallow puddles, the soft churn of mud under weight, a faint jingle of harness that might be bells or might be teeth. This is where curiosity tries to rise. Your mind wants to look, because the mind wants to map. But the old lore says a glance is connection, and connection to something like this is dangerous. So you do what the stories teach. You find the lowest place you can, a ditch, a hollow by roots, a fold in the earth where wet grass hides you. You press your palms into the cold ground, and you feel the ground press back. Solid, patient. You turn your face down, cheek to mud. The smell is sharp and honest. Clay, leaves, the faint metallic tang of water that has run over stones. The hunt passes. The air above your back thickens. Your hair lifts. Your ears fill with a rushing that is not wind, but movement. You hear horses, many of them. You hear hounds, breathing, close enough to make your stomach flutter. You hear a horn, low and steady, and it carries a command your bones understand even if your mind does not. Then, just as suddenly, the last sound thins into distance. The silence behind them is almost shocking, like waking from a dream. You wait longer than you think you need to. Do not rise too soon. Let the seam settle. Only when you can hear small things again, a far owl, a drop of water falling from leaf to leaf, do you lift your head. When you stand, your knees might tremble, not with terror, with release. You walk home, and everything looks the same, but not quite. The hedges seem more ancient. The road seems like it has been used by more than humans, and your own life feels, for a moment, like a candle flame that deserves careful hands. Now, come back to this room, back to the fire. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw loosen. The hunt is gone into the distance, and the distance is where it belongs. Here, the only rhythm you need is your own breathing, slow and steady, the simple proof that you are safe. There is a moment, after you have heard enough of these stories, when the other world stops feeling like a place of random tricks and starts feeling like a culture, a society, a court system with etiquette as sharp as blades and art as soothing as sleep. And if you were sitting here with me, watching the flame breathe in and out, you might feel the shift inside yourself. The dread becomes a quieter curiosity, not a hunger to chase the unknown, but a willingness to let it exist without demanding answers. The old tales say that the fairy courts reorganized after the gods withdrew, not destroyed, not erased, but folded inward. They became the hidden rulers of the hollow hills, the Sidhe, the mounds that look ordinary from the outside and impossible within. A hill that holds a palace, a door that opens only at twilight, a corridor that leads you to different destinations depending on the mood of your heart. Two great courts are often described. The Seelie, tied to the bright half of the year, to growth, to favors that come with rules. The Unseelie, tied to winter, to endings, to correction, to the hard truths that keep balance from turning into rot. Neither is purely good, neither is purely evil. They are forces with manners, and at the top of each court, there is a ruler, a queen whose presence is said to make flowers bloom, a king whose crown holds cold starlight. We speak of them as if they were characters, but the stories treat them like weather. To see them is to be altered. To be noticed by them is to be drawn into obligations that can last longer than you can imagine. What keeps their society from dissolving into endless impulse is not death. They do not have death, not in the way we do. So they created something else, oaths. It is almost comforting, in a strange way, that immortal beings would cling to promises, that they would need consequences, that they would need a structure strong enough to make an endless life feel like it has weight. In the lore, an oath is not a polite intention. It is a binding thing that changes the speaker. Break it, and your power drains away. Not instantly, perhaps. More like water seeping out of a cracked cup, slowly at first, then faster as the crack widens. Other beings avoid you, not out of hatred, but because oath-breaking is contagious in the moral sense. It threatens the architecture that holds their world together, and when an oath is made between fairy and human, the stakes become sharper, because humans do not always understand the literalness of otherworldly law. A farmer promises to leave a portion of harvest untouched, and then, one year, the crop fails and he takes it all. In his mind, he is surviving. In the court's mind, he is breaking the beam. The punishment, in the tales, is often poetic. A barren field, livestock sickness, bad luck that feels like someone quietly turning the wheel against you. And yet, there are also rewards that feel equally precise. A mill that never lacks customers, a well that never runs dry. protection that follows a family like a warm cloak. I want you to notice how this creates a very human feeling. Fear, yes, but also a kind of ethics. Be grateful. Be careful with words. Honor the boundaries of places. Leave a little for what you cannot see. Now, there is another side to fairy civilization that is easier to forget when we focus on hunts and bargains. Their art. The stories linger on fairy music for a reason. Music is a way of speaking without law. It slips past the mind and moves straight into the body. And in folklore, fairy music is not only beautiful, it is powerful. It can heal. It can inspire. It can also unmake the listener's sense of ordinary reality. Imagine, for a moment, an instrument made from materials that do not exist in daylight. A harp strung with threads that look like silver, but feel like moonlight when they vibrate. A flute carved from wood that grew in a forest where time moves differently, where trees remember the future. A drum whose rhythm seems to match your heartbeat, not by coincidence, but because the sound is shaping you. A healer in a fairy hall does not always use herbs. Sometimes they use tone, a slow sequence of notes that encourages bone to knit, a melody that quiets fever, a harmonic that settles a mind that is racing. The room itself seems to resonate, crystal walls holding the sound and returning it with gentle patience. And then, somewhere else, in the darker chambers, musicians use the same knowledge for punishment. Not gore, not violence in the crude sense, but distortion. A rhythm that steals sleep, a chord that makes memories feel far away, a melody that keeps repeating in your thoughts until your own inner voice feels strange. These are the stories warning you that beauty can be a door as well as a comfort. I've always found it telling that fairy craftsmanship is described with such loving detail. Shoes stitched so perfectly they never wear, metal that holds an edge forever, cloth that stays dry in rain, jewelry that protects quietly like a secret. All of that craft is an attempt to make permanence, to create meaning in endlessness, to say, if we cannot die, then let us build objects that feel like conclusions, finished things, perfect things. And yet, the stories also whisper that even perfect craft cannot solve the deeper ache. The paradox of fairy immortality is one of the darkest threads in the whole tapestry. Immortal beings envy mortals, not for our suffering, but for our urgency, for the way a limited life makes every choice feel like it matters, for the way love can be desperate and therefore bright, for the way grief has an ending, eventually, even if it takes years. Fair folk, in these stories, watch human lives the way you might watch candlelight, flickering, short, beautiful, and they feel a longing that is almost tender. Sometimes that longing turns to generosity, sometimes it turns to theft, sometimes it turns to bargains that bind, because binding is the closest thing to consequence they can create. This is why fairy food is so dangerous, not because it tastes good, though it does, because it transforms you into someone who belongs to them. It makes your body and spirit compatible with a world that does not end. And for someone who has been alive forever, the idea of drawing a mortal into that endlessness can feel like love, even when it is not asked for. The calendar, too, is part of their art. Samhain assemblies where judgments are pronounced, Beltane dances that bless the land, Imbolc cleaning and quiet renewal, Lughnasadh watching harvest with hungry interest, solstice peaks of power, moon phases that change how visible they are, how secret, how bold. In those festival times, the landscape itself becomes a stage, stone circles glowing faintly, standing stones feeling like witnesses, a thin place opening like a slow blink. You can almost hear it, the grass shifting, the air tightening, the water in a spring changing its sound. And then, slowly, we come back to our own world. Iron tools spread, church bells ring, Roads become straighter, forests are cut, the seams thicken. Direct encounters grow rarer. But the stories say the other world never leaves. It adapts, it waits. Those who listen carefully on quiet nights might still hear a hint of music carried on the wind. Not loud, not clear, just a pattern that makes your bones feel lighter for a moment. Those who walk alone near a river might notice a sudden stillness, as if something under the surface is listening. Those who pass a mound at twilight might feel the candlelight in their mind brighten, as if the darkness is not empty, only occupied. And if you take anything from these tales, let it be a gentle way of living, a habit of leaving a small portion untouched, not because you fear punishment, but because generosity is a bridge. A habit of speaking promises slowly, as if words are real beams. A habit of respecting places that feel old. A habit of not chasing every strange light in the bog. A habit of not mounting the perfect horse at the water's edge. Most of all, a habit of accepting mystery without panic. Right now, here in this dim room, the fire is quieting. The candles are lower. Dust drifts in slow spirals. Your breath is steady. And the other world, whether it is literal or symbolic, or both, can rest beside you like a shadow that does not threaten. You do not have to cross the threshold. You only have to know it exists. That knowledge, strangely, can make the mortal world feel richer, more textured, more alive. Water sounds deeper. Clay smells older. Candlelight looks like a language, so let your eyes grow heavy if they want to. Let your thoughts soften and wander. If a distant horn appears in your imagination, let it pass. If a faint song rises, let it fade. You are safe here. You are warm, and the night has nothing left to ask of you. If you want, we can step into one more scene, not to tempt fate, but to understand the texture of their world. A market. Folklore speaks of fairy markets at crossroads, on heaths, beside old wells, or in folds of hills where the grass grows unusually thick. Imagine arriving at dusk. The sky is bruised with purple. Your breath shows, and the air smells of peat smoke and damp stone. You hear voices you cannot quite place, like water moving quickly over gravel, like a song spoken rather than sung. There are stalls anchored to shadows, a table made of polished root, lanterns that glow without flame, bread that looks warm, apples that shine as if each one contains a small moon, rings and combs and tiny bottles of something that reflects candlelight with impossible depth. And then there are the prices, not coins, not always. A day of your labor, a memory, a promise to return on a certain moon, a strand of hair, a laugh. This is where the danger is not attack. The danger is agreement. A cup is offered. It smells like flowers and cold water. Your hands lift, almost by themselves, and then you remember. You pause. You breathe. You let the thirst be just thirst. You do not drink. Time, too, becomes slippery. People visit the other world and return to find years have passed, or they stay what feels like a night and come back to discover their house has changed. Time in these tales is not a river with one direction. It is a tide. So the folklore offers small protections. Carry iron. Yes, carry salt. Speak your own name softly, to remind yourself who you are. Keep a plain stone in your pocket, ordinary and heavy, to anchor your hand to the human world. And perhaps the gentlest protection is this: do not follow music into a place you cannot see. Let it be beautiful from afar. As the centuries moved on, the stories softened into habits. People leaving milk out at night, people avoiding certain paths after dark, people speaking blessings as they crossed a bridge. Some of these are only habits. Some are tiny poems made into action. Even now, there are moments when the old patterns flicker. A sudden fog on a familiar road. A ring of mushrooms in a park that makes you step around it without knowing why. A dream where you are walking under hills and the air smells of candle smoke, though there are no candles. If that happens, you do not have to interpret it. You can simply notice and then return to your breath. Because the purpose of this story is not to pull you into dread. It is to let the old darkness become a kind of blanket. Heavy, yes, but protective. A reminder that the night has always held myths, and humans have always survived them. So let the market fade. Let the lanterns dim. Let the music become a low hum that you can barely hear. Let the rules become simple again. Rest, breathe, soften. The room is smaller now, in a good way. The edges of your thoughts blur. The dust in the candlelight looks like slow snow, and the world beyond the walls can keep its secrets without pressing them into your hands. And as you drift closer to sleep, I want to leave you with one last image. Not a chase, not a bargain. Just a quiet doorway in your mind. A river at night, the surface almost black, but with a faint silver seam where the moon touches it. On the bank, reeds sway, and their dry tips click together softly, like fingers counting time. Somewhere under the water, stones hold steady, cold and smooth, the way they have always been. In so many fairy stories, water is a boundary that listens. It reflects, it remembers, it carries whispers from one side to the other. So if you ever feel afraid of the unseen, imagine offering that fear to the river. Let it drift away. Let it become just another ripple that fades into the dark. And here, in this room, let the same thing happen. Let the last tension in your shoulders dissolve. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Let your eyes sink back as if they are settling into warm sand. Nothing is required of you now. Only sleep. Good night.